In the biblical book of Genesis, there appear to be two contradictory accounts of how humanity was created. In the first instance, God assative created man and a woman simultaneously in verses 126 to 127. However, in Genesis chapter 2, there exists another version of the creation story, which most people are familiar with, where we see God creating Adam first out of dust, and then placing him in the Garden of Eden. After having breathed life into him, he tells Adam that he must enter the garden, but after a while he realizes that Adam and man in general should not be left in solitary. To work with this in mind, God tries to find a suitable companion for Adam, but after bringing him one of every animal in the world to serve as his companion, none of them appear to be suitable, so God causes Adam to enter a deep sleep, and while he's unconscious, he takes one of his ribs and uses it to fashion a woman, Eve. Adam realizes that Eve is a part of himself, and thus he deems her as a suitable companion. So as you can see, there exist two versions of at least how man was created, more specifically women, though we can assume that God created man in both cases from dust, even though the verses of 126 and 127 don't specify men were created from dust. But for women in this case, Eve, she was created both from dust and from Adam's rib. But you might ask, how can this be? She can only have been created by one means or another. Ancient rabbis would notice that the conception of Eve has two separate accounts, and that only one can be the real story. Therefore, a solution for this conundrum was devised, where the woman who was made simultaneously with Adam was Adam's first wife, or the first Eve, but that God replaced her because she was not subservient to Adam. It's this woman who would become known as the entity Lilith. Historians and scholars alike are not certain as to where the character Lilith originated from, although it's believed that much of what we know about her was inspired by Sumerian myths about female vampires known as Lilo, or by Mesopotamian myths surrounding female demons who scour the night. I've always been known as a succubus. But the first time Lilith is mentioned is when an association of the idea of creation is in the alphabet of Ben Sira or Siraj, which is considered to be a satirical Jewish work told by an anonymous writer. Ben Sira is said to have been the son of the prophet Jeremiah and explains details of his life, his adventures, and includes some of the tales he spun. It's in this work that we see one of the first glimpses of Lilith in literature. The tale explains that Lilith was Adam's first wife, and that she was created alongside Adam. However, unlike Eve, Adam and Lilith did not coincide and were not particularly compatible sexually. The text of Ben Sira explains that Adam always assumed the top position during sex, but that Lilith wanted this position for herself. Essentially, they both aspired to be dominant during sex, and it's implicated that Lilith wanted to be seen as Adam's equal, but Adam didn't want this. And so, like most of the women in my life, Lilith packed her stuff and flew away. In the text of Ben Sira, Lilith actually utters the name of God, which in Jewish tradition is something sacred and shouldn't be spoken after this. She leaves the Garden of Eden, much to Adam's dismay. Adam turns to God to explain to him what had happened, and it appears that God takes Adam's side. Whether God was angry at Lilith for uttering his name or angry at her for not assuming the subservient role in the Adam is not known, but God is so insulted that he actually sent 3 angels to hunt down Lilith and drag her back against her will if need be. But when the angels found Lilith by the Red Sea, she would not return with them, and despite their orders from God, Lilith remained defiant at this stalemate. It's Lilith who proposes a deal with the angels, where she suddenly assumes the role as a killer of children and men. In this section, Lilith promises that she would not harm any boy or man if they are protected by an amulet that has the name of the 3 angels who chased her inscribed on it. In some interpretations, it's understood that God created Lilith as an evil entity from the beginning for reasons we just don't know. In these versions, Lilith was made to kill children when they were born all the way up until the 8th day of their existence. Female babies were to have had a longer window in that they could be affected by Lilith by up to 12 days. The angels who had chased her down, though, were relentless and would not leave her alone until she finally came to the deal that she would not harm anyone if they wore an amulet displaying their names. Once this deal was struck, the angels left her alone. It's also interpreted that Lilith became a demon after leaving the Garden of Eden, and then she established her own purpose to produce more of her demon offspring. When the angels learned of this, they were more willing to accept her deal, so long as one of her demon offsprings were killed every day, thus ultimately reducing the potential evil in the world who had them actually having to do anything. In later legends, Lilith is said to appear as a beautiful woman whose only intention is to seduce men so that she may spawn demon children. She's also said to rape men in their sleep. In more modern times, the concept of Lilith has been hijacked by feminist movements as a way to reflect their own emancipation in their male counterparts, from the definition of societal expectations to the rejection of both Adam and God. Lilith serves as an inspiration to this movement as far as the Bible goes, though, as this is a Biblical Stories Explained series. Lilith appears only once in Isaiah 30 verses 4 to 14, which refers to a demoness of the night. It comes about when Isaiah is explaining God's judgment and what the landscape of Edom will come to look like in the time of the final days after the harassment of Israel and God's people. Isaiah is quite vivid in his description, where in some translations he states, "Wildcats shall meet with hyenas, goat demons shall call to each other, and Lilith shall repose and find a place to rest." But what does Isaiah mean by this? Well, it's likely that in this translation Isaiah is referring to or borrowing from Jewish folklore about the night demoness who preys on the night-hunting men. The use of Lilith in this passage aims to convey just how much destruction the people of Eden will suffer at the hands of God, that they will be plagued upon by wildcats, goat demons, and finally Lilith herself. The inclusion of Lilith in this sinister-sounding coupling only exemplifies her malevolence, that she stands on the same level as ferocious beasts, and is even mentioned lost, as if to illustrate just how odious of a creature she actually is. Some might say that Isaiah is indeed actually referring to Lilith, the first woman as told in the ancient Jewish story of Ben Sura, and that it is her who's returning to contribute to the calamity of Edom. Other translations of the Bible, however, omit Lilith entirely, and she is referred to simply as a screeching night owl. Another interesting account implies that Lilith actually returns to the Garden of Eden for revenge against Adam in the guise of the serpent, understanding that Adam is her equal. She cannot exact her revenge against him without first implementing a devious plan, or Adam is her equal. Eve is deemed as lesser, given that she was created after Lilith and made subservient by God, so as to appease Adam. So Lilith manipulates Eve and tricks her into eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge. What's quite interesting about this idea is that it's actually corroborated by Renaissance artwork called The Fall of Man, in which the serpent is depicted not as a serpent at all, but instead as a female. Later artists such as Michelangelo also follow this idea and paint the role of the serpent not as a snake, but as a woman. Modern archaeological excavations have since uncovered an abundance of amulets, all of which date back thousands of years. These amulets, like I mentioned earlier, are inspired by the Jewish tale of Sarah, when Lilith declares that only the amulets bearing the names of the angels who chased her can be used as a defense against her. It seems that the use of these amulets has been taken quite literally, and there are sections in Jerusalem today that will sell these amulets to those who are seeking defense against the wandering dynamic entity that is Lilith. As always, guys, if you've enjoyed today's video, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit a subscribe button. Let me know who you'd like to see next on the Biblical Stories Explained series. Until the next time, guys.